Hey guys, it's Mike Lipowski. So the question I got for you today is this. How much do you bench? I'm just kidding. I don't give a shit how much you bench. Quite honestly, I don't care how much I bench. But what you might care about is how much load you need to be using. How heavy do you need to lift so that you can stimulate gains in muscular size and strength? And then what are some of the implications that load has on your overall training demands? So when it comes to determining load, there's a few factors that come into play. One of them being your stage of development. That means whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or an advanced training. As a beginner, light load, heavy load, any load is going to represent a strain that's above and beyond what your muscles are accustomed to. So your body's going to adapt. You're going to get the response that you're looking for. But as an advanced trainee, you're probably accustomed to heavy loads, right? So your muscles don't necessarily respond all that well to some of these micro increases because it's nothing that's out of the ordinary. It's able to handle that quite easily. But if you're sitting in that intermediate phase, you're kind of sitting in that sweet spot. This is when every increase that you have in load tends to have a corresponding increase in muscular development. And every increase in muscular development has a corresponding increase in the amount of load that you can handle. It's a great position to be in, but unfortunately, it's usually short-lived. Now, we also have our goals. Goals play a big role in this too. So, I mean, if you're a power lifter, well, quite frankly, if you're in any kind of strength sport, you may as well shut this off now. I really don't have anything of value to add, simply because you're just going to be lifting heavy shit all the time. I mean, that's just what you do. It's a function of your sport. Lift heavy tomorrow, lift heavy the day after. It's like a never-ending process. But for those of you guys who your goal is muscular development, bodybuilding, aesthetics, or functional increases in strength, and by that I mean the types of increases in strength that help improve your quality of living, then most of what I'm going to say really pertains to you. And so the amount of load that you need to use really should be representative of the time under tension that you're attempting to work within. So if we go back a few videos when we spoke about our various muscle fiber types, how to determine your muscle makeup and your rate of fatigue, and find out what the appropriate time under tension or rep range is for you. If we go back to that, well then, the only thing that we need to know is how much weight do we need to use to reach fatigue, to fatigue our muscles in that time under tension or within that rep range, and with proper form. And speaking of proper form, that brings me back to my original question, how much do you bench? That question has pretty much ruined so many trainees. I mean, you can't even quantify it. And it's because what winds up happening is you got little guys and small guys in the gym trying to keep up with the big guys. And so the focus only becomes, how much can I lift? How much more weight can I add onto the bar? But what gets lost in all that is that the amount of strain taken on by the target muscles, the muscles that you're intending to help grow by performing that particular exercise, is no greater. I mean, you might be using 20, 30 pounds more than you were weeks or months or years ago, but there's no corresponding increase in muscular size. Why is that? How is that? And the reason why this happens is because we have to differentiate between gross load and net load. So really, I mean, it's not that difficult to figure out. Gross load is just how much weight's loaded on the bar, how much you're lifting. But net load is how much weight, how much strain is being taken on by the target muscles. And so if we use a simple example like a pec deck, we've all been in this situation where we're nearing the end of the set, right? Fatigue's starting to set in and we're grinding through each rep. And just when we think there's nothing left, we suddenly tense up every outer lying muscle, build up our intra-abdominal pressure, and suddenly we can crank through another repetition as if it was the first. I mean, we've all done this, and many of you probably do it on a daily basis or with every exercise you perform. But again, you can't lose sight of the fact that this coordinated or orchestrated effort of the muscles and changes in your leverages, it's not contributing anything to the target muscle and the strain that it's taking on. So it's great that you're lifting greater loads, but there's also a negative side effect of that too. And that is the amount of systemic stress that you're placing on yourself by bringing outerlying muscle groups into play, well, that's going to make it harder for your body to recover. And if our goal is to train as intensely as possible, but still using the most amount of volume possible and training as frequently as possible, we don't want to add anything into the mix that's going to slow down the recovery process. So we want to minimize systemic stress while keeping muscular or local stress very, very high. So that's why how you perform your exercises plays such a big role in how much load you should be using. And a lot of this means that you kind of have to take your ego out of the equation and just focus on what's the right thing to do. Now, the last thing that I'll add to this is that if you're training with a very high intensity, it's unlikely that you need very heavy loads because you're training your muscles to the point of fatigue, to that point of muscular failure. As you're approaching that point, your muscles are experiencing strain as if it were using a maximum amount of load. So your recruitment of fast twitch muscle fibers and those that contribute most to your growth will be very high. If you're training with a high volume, you also don't necessarily need very heavy loads, and the research backs me up, even though I'm not a big research guy. I prefer empirical evidence and show me the proof. And again, it's also taking into account individual differences, but again, we can't ignore the fact that the research even points to the fact that if we're using a higher volume, then heavy loads are just not as necessary because the amount of demands being placed on the muscles are being made up for it with the greater amount of work that's being performed. But if we're training with a lower intensity or a lower volume, it's very likely that heavy loads will be necessary to make up for that fiber recruitment and overall training demands.